and required you to indicate which particular theology that you studied or which creed that you studied. And this was the way that it was. Now, someone who looks at the Shaykh al-Azhars all the way back will reach the point of Salahuddin and then there'll be a blank space. Because before that time, they were 12ers. And the scholars of Muslim Orthodoxy do not consider cultists, no matter how long they've studied, no matter how many books they've memorized, they're not considered scholars until they leave that cult, come into Muslim Orthodoxy, and they study. So when you read about Salahuddin Al-Ayubi simply just coming into the masjid, interrupting the khutbah, deposing the Fatimi ruler, that's for a reason. That our people don't view the cults and their things with any sanctity. It's a statement that Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he said that the rebellious sinners of my ummah, their graves are gardens. And the righteous, pious worshippers of the cults, their graves are pits from the great fire. And that is how the early generations viewed the cults. We don't care how righteous you are. We don't care how noble you are. If you do not have the correct creed, it doesn't matter. Why? Where are they getting this from? A hadith of the Prophet ﷺ from Ibn Majah and other collections in which he said about the people of innovation, that for them there is no prayer, there is no hajj, there is no zakah for them. That's the statement. A further statement is where he said, whoever honors a person who belongs to the people of innovation, he has helped to destroy Islam. مَنْ وَقَّرَ صَاحِبَ بِدْعَةٍ فَقَدْ أَعَانَ عَلَى هَدْمِ الْإِسْلَامِ. Whoever honors a person of innovation has helped to destroy Islam. This hadith in Sahih al-Jami is unequivocal, but we can see a disconnect between the scholars of Muslim Orthodoxy and people today who sometimes act as spokesmen or spokeswomen for Islam. And in this quagmire of relativism, well, no, alhamdulillah, as long as they say that they're Muslim, well, then it's fine as long as they say they were Muslim, we wouldn't have these situations and we wouldn't have these ahadith. There was one singular foundational creed. There is one truth, not truths. No one ever says that there is more than one way to make nitrous oxide because someone could get killed. But faith is more volatile than that. And so you need to understand when Salahuddin Al-Ayubi comes in, he's not coming in as sort of in an ecumenical fashion. Let's get along, let's sit down, open the books, read them together. No, you are wrong, you're upon falsehood, we're replacing you. The mihrabs were replaced. Salahuddin Al-Ayubi replaced the mihrabs because the mihrabs in the Fatimi masjids were facing Karbala. So he either obliterated the mihrabs, and in some cases he couldn't obliterate them because they were actually recesses in the wall. So he would pave over them or have them plastered over and make a new mihrab. So those that may visit Egypt in the future, if you come to a masjid and you say, well, why are there two mihrabs? Or this one's facing all over the place, or this masjid's a museum piece now, and this mihrab's in the wrong place. Well, the reason for that is because those people were Fatimi, and they're not now. Now, after this time, Salahuddin Al-Ayubi made a point. People of innovation did not deserve a place of teaching in a Sunni country. For the first time in 209 years, the Abbasid rulers and their deputies had their khutbahs made after Salahuddin informed the Khalifa of what had happened and his victory in Egypt. So prior to that, 200 years. So for 209 years, North Africa, with the exception of the place where Qarawiyyin was and its satellites, were hearing Shia khutbahs cursing the companions. So you would have people that would skip Jum'ah or would not go, or they had to hold their own jama'at because they would go to the khutbah and hear companions being cursed, Muawiyah being cursed, Ali being cursed, la'na and takfir being made on the companions. So when you're sitting in a gathering in the masjid, which you're in your best clothes, you're ready to worship, you're ready to listen to the news, and you hear someone in the khutbah say, La'natullahi ala Muawiyah, may Allah's curse be on Muawiyah, La'natullahi ala, and just name after name after name. Then some people just chose to leave, some people wouldn't be there, some people chose just to skip it and try to establish their own jama'ah. So what Salahuddin Al-Ayubi did was quite remarkable. There was an argument, though, between Salah ad-Din and Nur ad-Din, which was close to leading to hostilities, but finally the matter was resolved. When 568 came, Umar ibn Shahanshah, who was the cousin of Salah ad-Din, took over North Africa and pushed the Crusaders out of Morocco. Shams ad-Dawla, who was the brother of Salah ad-Din, he marched to Yemen and overthrew the apostate Abdul Nabi and established the Ayyubid governance in the land. The Shafi'i fiqh and Ash'ari creed were in dominance over the Mu'tazila and Shia. The Ayyubid governance started with a firm commitment to building a Sunni organization to rival the Shia in North Africa and return the honor to Muslim Orthodoxy rule after the years of weak and ineffective Abbasid rule. Now this is a very important point. The Ayyubid, or the Ayyubiya, which was the name of their Jama'ah named after their clan, they were all brothers or relations, close relations. So you have Turan ibn Ayyub, Sayful Islam Tukhtikin ibn Ayyub, Ismail ibn Ayyub, who was the son of Tukhtikin, Sayful Islam Atabak, An-Nasr Ayyub, Sulaiman ibn Taqiyuddin, and Salahuddin, whose name is actually Yusuf. Now, these people were the main ones in North Africa and in Sham that protected this religion. They were the main ones that protected this religion in those areas. And they did something that was important. Today, you will see people that will discuss things like, well, what is the Khilafah? Or how do we establish Khilafah? Or how do we do this? Do you belong to a group? Are you working for Khilafah? Are you working for this? Are you working for that? Salah ad-Din Al-Ayubi, if you look at all of his writings and all of his discussions, his writings are very few. And his speech was very little, but his work was a lot. Because if you don't have anywhere, if you don't have a base to bring Sharia, who cares? You can talk about Sharia all day long. It doesn't matter. Do you have any place to implement it? No. Well, then the only option for you is you're going to have to physically take over some place in order to have somewhere to implement and do what you've been yakking about and talking about for all that time. If you don't have anywhere, your movement's already a failure if you're talking. If you're talking about having some place, we need this, we need that, you should do this, you should belong to this group, you should do that, and you don't have anywhere, well, your movement's already a failure. That's the proof that you are nothing in and of itself is demonstrated in front of us by you, because you don't have anywhere. Because the people that are working that would have some place build up what's there, and then they start to roll out their programs. And so Salah ad-Din and his brothers and his relations, that's what they did. They built up something. Today, people talk. Then, 800-900 years ago, they built. And they worked hard. And so when you look at what he brought about, how he went through all the trials and tribulations, he understood that in order to bring back respect to Muslim Orthodoxy, because really the Ismaili and others, they were the empires. No one respected Muslim Orthodoxy in terms of the cults that were looking from the side. No one respected Muslim Orthodoxy. And so Salah ad-Din brought back respect that, no, we have a place where we're implementing, because the Abbasids, they couldn't go outside of Baghdad. If they went out, if their leaders went outside of Baghdad, they could be killed by the Turkish troops that supported their borders. They didn't have any real power. They couldn't control their own borders. They couldn't strengthen their own people. They didn't have the ability to collect their own zakah without getting killed by Turkish troops that were their support. So Salah ad-Din brought in the understanding that, no, we're going to make a confederacy and we're going to have a place and build things back up. And it makes sense because he was one of the ulama. So he and the other ulama would know how to do this. Nur ad-Din Zenki died in 569 AH. This gave the Crusaders more heart in the hope that they would have the opportunity to attack again and strengthen their hold. They'd been limited to a few castles dotting the hillsides of Sham, while most of their allies had been driven from the area. So the Kuffar were happy that Nur ad-Din Zenki died because of how formidable of a fighter he was. They had incredible fear of him. And his reputation and the reputation of Salah ad-Din Al-Ayubi. made it all the way back to Europe. And so the Franks heard about him, of all different stripes, whether the Franks were French, whether they're from Flanders, whether they're from English, all the Franks heard about him and his reputation, and that he never gave up, and he continued to fight them constantly. And he was, with Salah ad-Din, he was the main one keeping the Middle East and North Africa from just completely collapsing. Because the Fatimiyya, their reign over Egypt was becoming now, over Egypt and North Africa was becoming more symbolic as well. Because the Franks were exercising an external power over them and using them as puppet vassals. And so Salah ad-Din's era was very important. Now, Salah ad-Din took Damascus without a fight in 570 AH and had no problem sustaining it. His assistant, As-Salih Ismail, took Halab, while Salah ad-Din moved on to take Hama, then went to besiege Halab, but an argument broke out between the brothers regarding who had the right to keep it. So Salah ad-Din returned it. By this time, his brothers were in control of Sham and Egypt. Salah ad-Din moved to Ba'alabek and secured it. So Salah ad-Din takes Damascus without a fight. There's no uprising against him because the people of Damascus are Sunnis. They don't have a problem with that. And the people of Damascus were tired of the fighting and wanted structure. His assistant, As-Salih Ismail, takes Halab, and Salah ad-Din moves on to Hama. Hama is not too far from Nawat, where Imam al-Nawawi was born. Hama gave birth to numerous grand ulama. One of the great ulama of this era, who is a great teacher who I had the opportunity to take from, Sheikh Muhammad Fuad al-Barazi, is Hamawi, the great Hanafi judge. Magnificent scholar, memorized the foundational Hanafi books, memorized the Sihah Sitta, and studied with the Ghumari brothers, one of the greatest Hanafi scholars of this era, Sheikh Muhammad Fuad al-Barazi, one of the greatest of this era in terms of his knowledge, his capacity, his sagacity, all of the things that he possesses. He is a complete package. And so he brought his ilm to this country years ago. And I had the opportunity to be in his gatherings. And everything about those people that you see from Hama and other famous cities is different. There's a difference between a sheikh and an alim. Everything about those people is different. Where you see a man in his 70s, in his 60s, and he only has a handful of gray hairs in his beard and on his head. It tells you that this individual is someone different. When he can tell you from the top of a book and he can say, well, what about this passage in the Hidayah by Marghinani? He says that is line 5 from top, the 5th line from the top. And that masala doesn't mean that. You've quoted it wrong. It means this, and he's quoting it from memory. These are the people of our ummah. These are the inheritors of the prophets. These are the real scholars. And so Hama, when he takes Hama, that's a major thing. That's a major thing. And he moves on to Ba'alabek. Ba'alabek produced great ulama like Alauddin al-Ba'ali, rahimahullah, Ibn al-Liham. Ba'alabek produced great ulama like Imam Abu Muhammad Asbasalar, the great Turkish alim, was coming from Ba'alabek. Ba'alabek boasted at least 70 scholars at any one time, preaching from all the minarets. Ba'alabek is now in what's today they're calling Lebanon. But back then it was just all Sham. And they had a great scholarly history. 562 AH. In this year, Salah ad-Din ordered the building of a mammoth wall from the land around Lower Egypt and Cairo in particular to protect from further Frankish attacks. This huge wall, some historians state that it was to be more than 1,000 cubits high and more than 70 cubits thick. If you want to understand that, a cubit is 19 inches. You multiply that by 1,000, that tells you